Hello, welcome to another episode of Curious Minds. This is the second installment of The Listening Christian. If you were with us last week, you got to hear about the importance of listening and the idea that in Christian apologetics, normally we are known for being good speakers, good at pushing our views on other people, and not necessarily good at listening to the views of others. So this is an evangelism, philosophy, and apologetics podcast. I come from a Christian worldview. I believe that that's the worldview that best answers the big questions of the world around us. And I do this from the Christian Student Center right across the street from the University of New Mexico. So that will be where I have the lively conversations and get to put these things into practice and get to reflect on the things that I hear about from conversations over there at the university. But it is summer now, and being summer, we're not necessarily having a lot of philosophical dialogue. And I came to get these podcasts started with some scripted podcasts on something that I think is important as an introductory topic on how to address the issues of evangelism, apologetics, and philosophy, and how to get started in that endeavor. And so what I've decided to begin with is the topic of listening. I have got to put that into practice somewhat the last couple weeks, and it's a good time. It really takes the pressure off the evangelist or apologist to be able to enter into a conversation with an attitude of listening and of caring for the other person. I think a lot of times when you feel the heat and the pressure, it is because, well, you're actually not listening, you're not caring much for the other person, and you may not be good at asking questions. You may think that the pressure is all on you to present your position in an intelligent way. But today, I'm going to discuss the topic of asking good questions. And if you are a student of Greg Koukl of Stand to Reason, you know this tactic from him of asking questions. Maybe you're not that intelligent in answering deep philosophical questions of the day. Maybe certain things are just over your head. I had a short discussion with a biology professor. And you know what? He could certainly go over my head with certain biological concepts. So what's my role there? Find ways to ask good questions. So I'm going to dive into the script of this, and remember, this is surrounding an important verse in James 1:19, which says, "Everyone must be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger." We're looking at the importance of listening in the context of evangelism and apologetics. I am arguing that Christian evangelism and apologetics needs to lead with listening rather than with proclamation. Listening connects us relationally to another person. It moves us towards God's heart for people as we get to know them, understand them, and sympathize with them. This is more important than ever because much of the culture is overly distracted, busy, and generally lives at a social distance from the thousands of people who surround them. The best listening will be provoked by asking the right types of questions. No, I'm not talking about trapping the other person in logical flaws. Rather, this is part of the listening stage. Questions provoke the meaningful responses because it's your job to relate to, care for, and know the other person. There's a Socratic reason for questioning. If you are familiar with Socrates, the philosopher from about the 5th century BC, I believe, he was great at asking questions. Good questioning is built on the belief that there are hidden truths within the mind of the other person. These are brought to the surface when one person stimulates the thoughts of the other. In all likelihood, a person will not delve deeply into these beliefs, thoughts, and ideas without a conversational partner to knock on the doors that they are hiding behind. The exception to this is probably the person who is an avid writer, journaling their inner thoughts regularly. Still, apart from a receiver, these thoughts never attain their full purpose. Let me delve into philosophy a little bit here. Socrates had a very different perspective of the human mind than later empiricists did. Empiricists believe that knowledge began when things were experienced and evaluated in the mind. In other words, there is no knowledge before something attaches to any of the five senses. That's empiricism. Socrates, a Greek teacher from before the time of Christ, taught that knowledge already resided in the mind of each human. Teaching, then, was not for the sake of imparting knowledge as much as it was drawing out knowledge. So how did this play out in the teaching style of Socrates? The Socratic method focuses on asking questions that provoke certain pieces of knowledge to be realized. The information is accessible in the mind already, but they do not know that it is accessible. When an adult looks at a word, such as computer, they can take one split-second glance and recognize that the word represents computer. But when you show the same word to a child, they only see a mess of letters. They don't recognize the entirety of the word in one glance. At that moment, the child believes that he does not know what the word is. It might take them 20 or 30 seconds to figure out how the sounds of all the letters run together into one word. C-O-M-P-U-T-E-R, computer. Computer! If you show them the word a second, third, and fourth time, they begin to instantly recognize that the word is computer. According to the philosophy of Socrates, it's not that the child did not know the word, it's that they had not drawn out what they already knew about it. This is even more clear with mathematics. A child may look at an equation like 8 times 4 and think he has no clue what the answer is. This is another matter of him not knowing that the knowledge is accessible within his mind, even if he does not readily admit that. There are a few ways he could get to the answer without having the answer memorized. He could draw 4 rows of 8 and count them up. He could add 8 plus 8, and then add 8 more, and then add 8 more. Socrates would discourage telling the child the answer that he needs to memorize. Rather, he would ask the child questions to draw out the child's ability to attain the answer for himself. It may look something like this. Socrates, what is 8 times 4? I don't know. I think you do. How many is 8? The child pulls out 8 marbles. This many. What if you had 4 times that many? The child reaches for more marbles. I don't know how many that is. There are 8 marbles to a team. How many teams do you have? The child organizes the 8 marbles. 1 team. 1 team? So what is 8 times 1? The child responds 8. If we're looking for 8 times 4, how many teams do we need? 4. How many is that? The child counting 30, 31, 32, 32. Then do you know 8 times 4? The child resolves, yeah, 32. Do you think if I gave you another problem, you could know that also? Yeah. Socrates' point is that people know more than they think they know. But far too often this knowledge is not drawn out. Asking questions could move people to realize things that they didn't know they could figure out. For Socrates, there was no limit to what people could discover through exploring the depths of the human mind. You may not be on board with Socrates' idea that each person is born with a fullness of knowledge. That's fine. I can't unequivocally endorse Socrates here. I think there are numerous things that we accept by authority and numerous things that we accept by experience. These things are filed away in our minds according to our own human bias, which may cause a memory to be slightly different from what objectively occurred. Still, we should pay attention to Socrates because his method verifies that there is so much untapped potential and unprobed understanding dwelling in the human mind. As Socrates asked questions, people began to uncover more and more truths. As we ask questions to those we meet, they may begin to realize some of the uncharted territory of big ideas and significant worldview truths. There's a medical reason to asking good questions as well. Again, parallels and parables from the medical field shed some interesting light on the topic. Scott Fishman, who I mentioned last week, a medical doctor, he wrote a book for current and aspiring physicians, encouraging them to treat the entire person by resisting the temptation to impersonally quantify, classify, categorize, and prescribe. Rather than hopping to these shortcuts, he encourages a more engaging and personal treatment, one that is heavily reliant on listening. He says, when doctors fail to ask the right questions, we distance ourselves from our patients. We forget to focus on the whole person, and all too often we miss golden diagnostic clues that could lead to far more effective interventions. Questions do some very interesting things. They force the other person to reflect on ideas and feelings. They open up avenues of investigation that may be commonly avoided by the individual. Good questions will lead the person to think about themselves. They will challenge the person to assess the consistency of their actions versus their values. Questions can establish trust and openness as well, which is important for conversations to move into phases of healing and reception of larger truth paradigms. However, not all questions will accomplish this. Why not? Because people are quite skilled at detecting phoniness. First, questions must be asked out of sincerity, not fakeness, not ulterior motives. You must be able to move beyond asking questions to satisfy your own ego or fulfill some subtle requirement from people around you. It is a matter of the heart. If you find yourself disgusted, embittered, disinterested, or greedy in approaching a conversation, be quick to check your motives. Pause and recheck your priorities. Pray that you would reflect God's heart toward the other person. There's a biblical case that can be made for questioning. Even God asked good questions. No, this has nothing to do with any measure of ignorance on God's part. It was to draw certain realizations out of the others. Remember, right after the fall, God asked questions to Adam and Eve regarding the circumstances that led to their blatant disobedience. God asks a whopping 35 questions just in Job 38. The intensity of the events stayed in mind because God drew each person by asking questions. This not only stimulates the mind in the moment, it generates long-term thought as they would further dwell on the questions. Jesus did the same type of thing. Who do people say that I am? Who do you say that I am? Was John's baptism a spiritual matter or an earthly matter? What do you want me to do for you? You see, Jesus asking questions, and apparently was all-knowing as he did so he had some different purpose for asking questions, and I would argue he was asking questions for the sake of others hearing and for the individual being questioned to be engaged with Jesus, to draw out something from his heart regarding how he would respond. So what sort of questions should we ask? I think we need to focus on three types: clarifying questions, open-ended questions, and thought-provoking questions. Let me explain these a little bit more. Clarifying questions follow naturally from nonverbal communication. Sometimes we will get distracted and miss out on something that the other person said. It shows concern for the other person when we recognize that we missed something and want to understand it correctly. Do not be ashamed to admit that you missed a word or a sentence. Do not pretend that you understood if you really didn't. Open-ended questions are questions that demand more than a simple one-word answer. It causes the person to think about the details in a way that he can articulate. This is opposed to questions such as, does that make you feel bad? A better question would be, what does that feel like? Instead of asking a question like, who fought the Battle of Jericho, we should ask, Why did Joshua fight the Battle of Jericho? The easy type of question demands a one-word answer that does not shape the heart or mind of the other. On the other hand, if they try to articulate why Joshua engaged in this battle, they may search for a truth that they then internalize. Ask questions that are easy enough to answer, but could be answered to a variety of depths. These are feelers, giving us hints at the level of depth that the person is willing to go to at the time. Instead of asking, "Are you good?" we could ask, "What happened? What does that feel like?" Questions like this open up the sense of compassion and concern. They show the other person that they are valued. Not all open-ended questions are important questions. Questions should not only be open-ended, but should have a purpose. They should be thought-provoking. This is where questions become more apologetic and evangelistic. The best conversation starter probably is not, "Hey, do you know Jesus?" A simple yes or no, closed question, and it's kind of vague. A more open alternative would be, "A lot of people place a huge emphasis on Jesus. Why do you think that is?" The right questions come from imagining the right endpoint of a conversation. Christian ministers would like to just be able to state the gospel in an accurate manner and have it fully embraced in an instant. Make the goal simple, such as they will see good reasons to think that it was indeed Jesus, not Judas, who was crucified. That being an issue very relevant to conversing with Muslims, there's the goal. What's the route? To be simplistic, you could just tell them, "Hey, Jesus, not Judas, was crucified." But how would it look to use thought-provoking questions to get there? Why do you think that it was not Jesus who was crucified? How well would you be able to tell the difference between two people you've been around for a couple of years? If it was Judas on the cross, then who was it that hanged himself? Why would the followers of Jesus want to tell everyone that he died a shameful death? How careful would the Romans be to make sure they got the right person? When you tell them outright, they can simply reject what you say and move on. But if you give them thought-provoking questions, those questions tend to stay in mind. They will continue to ponder what they could say or could have said in response to the question. Now, the following is largely taken from David Geisler's Conversational Evangelism. Interesting video on YouTube if you're looking for another good resource. And David Geisler has a great talk on the importance of listening to sharing and defending the faith. In it, he references what a friend said regarding the significance of questions. He said, "A person can close his ears to facts he doesn't want to hear, but if a pointed question causes him to form the answer in his own mind, he cannot escape the conclusion, because it's a conclusion he reached himself." End quote. Solid questions take the pressure off. You have no obligation to come across as the expert if you are good at asking questions. You are also showing that you care about the other person by taking a personal interest. As you ask questions, you show that your interest is beyond the surface level. If you ask tougher questions, this can become difficult for the other person. They may feel the pressure to answer the question well and not look bad in front of you. Remember, the goal is not to make them look stupid. Show them that you are patient as they look for the right ways to respond to things. Do not interrupt. That will close off their attentiveness as the tensions begin to rise. Help them dig for answers. Acknowledge that certain questions are very tough to answer. And again, realize that whatever idea they're trying to describe, they have some reason for believing it. Let me close this section by reinforcing the main point. I'm interested in bringing apologetics to the hungry and inquiring minds of college-age students as they take on the chapters of adulthood and the liberal university environment. I also desire to assist people in the church who are interested in strengthening their faith for the sake of personal fruitfulness. I want to help equip them with tools to help their effectiveness as Christian witnesses in an increasingly hostile environment. Why would I, as one who is dedicated to heavier topics of apologetics, theology, and philosophy, begin with the topic of listening and asking questions? Listening and asking questions creates the space through which quality apologetic and evangelistic dialogue can take place. It causes the heart of the Christian witness to be filled with love as it values the other person, rather than charging forward with his own agenda. It opens the other person up, then connects us empathetically to the other person. It establishes trust. It teaches us about the other person while teaching the other person about himself. It is a non-threatening route through which the person can begin to discover important truths. If an apologist is truly interested in the other person, he will take joy in listening and asking good questions. Now, in the third portion of this three-part series on listening, I want to look at dealing with the disagreement and hostility and ask the question, how long do I put up with this? How long should we engage in a conversation that seems to be hostile? And how do I evaluate whether the conversation should continue or whether I should go elsewhere? So thanks for joining me on this middle portion of this little mini-series on listening. So I am Evan Van Sickle, coming to you from the Christian Student Center at the University of New Mexico on Curious Minds, where we ask the big questions about life, philosophy, theology, and engage in topics of Christian apologetics. Hope you'll join me next week as we wrap up this mini-series on listening. May God bless and guide you.